Okay, so the first thing we need to do to create our JSON API is to obviously create a Rails app. So we'll just run Rails new, and we're going to call our app something amazing. Let's call it Hola Señorita API. What a stupid name, but whatever. With the Rails 5 API flag, which is pretty awesome. It's going to give us sort of a bare bones Rails app that doesn't have a bunch of the middleware. It doesn't have a bunch of the assets or the views, helpers, and all that stuff that we don't need for creating a JSON API. So it's lightweight. It's awesome. So we'll open up another tab here on Tmux. Let's go to, what was it called? A ridiculous name, Hola Señorita API. And let's just run the bundle. And then we'll open it in Vim here. Cool. So you'll notice that it doesn't have, if you go to the app folder, it has views, but it doesn't have your regular like layout view. It doesn't have an assets folder with all your JavaScripts and style sheets. So purely use the Rails API flag purely for creating JSON APIs that you'll later use with a front end like React, or whether it be React, Angular, Ember, etc., for consuming JSON. So pretty awesome. Let's go ahead and install the JSON API-resources gem, which is what we're going to be using instead of active model serializers. So we're going to open up our gem file. And the gem is called, actually, you know what, let's get rid of a whole bunch of garbage we don't need here. Okay, whoops, we do need that. We don't need that one. So we'll do gem JSON API resources. And we are gonna, let's close this. And we'll run the bundle one more time. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and configure eager loading. And we'll also work on making this a bit safer. So not app, let's go to config, environments, development, and we will make eager loading true. And we'll also set this to false. Then what we're going to have to do is to prevent cross-site forgery attacks. Let's go to app controllers, application control. Let's just take this out, and we'll say class application controller inherits from action controller. Hopefully this doesn't raise an error when we run it. I think this should work. So we'll say protect from forgery with no session. Okay, let's go ahead and save that and close it. And we'll close this one as well. And now what we can do is create our model. So as we said, it's a super simple API. Basically just has a user model and a post model. And a user has many posts. And a post belongs to a user. So fairly simple. Let's go ahead and just run a generator here. Rails G model user. And our user model is going to have we're only going to give them one column. And it's going to be a name. And that name will be a string. So let's run that. See, hopefully that goes through. Okay, so it's kind of hanging here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video for a second and restart my terminal. Sometimes it just gets backed up because of Spring or some other process. So it's clearly hanging here, so I will be right back. Alright, so I went ahead and restarted. I also stopped Spring, so hopefully it doesn't hang now. So we'll do Rails G model user, and what column? It just had a simple column here, string, right? So let's go. Let's see if our model finally gets created. Great, it worked. Now we're going to create our post model. So Rails G model, excuse me, Rails G model post. Which should the post have? It'll have a title, and this will be a string. It should also have some content. Let's make that text. And this should have a column referencing the user. So we're going to say user ID. That's going to be an integer. Okay, so let's run that. Awesome. So now that our models are created, let's jump into those files. and we'll refresh, and there they are, post and user. So a user is going to has many posts naturally, and a post is going to belong to a user, and that should be about it for the models. Now what we can go ahead and do is run the migration. We'll do rakedb, or before that let's create the database, rakedb create, and okay, database created, great. And we'll also do rakedb migrate to create our tables. Cool. So now what we can do is create our controller. So we'll say Rails G controller. We obviously need one for each resource. So we'll say Rails G controller. Let's do users first. And it's as simple as that. We don't need to, because we're using JSON API resources, we don't need to define any actions. We're going to inherit from resource controller. So I'm assuming that it'll automatically sort of know what to do with all the rest, as far as REST methods go. So Rails G controller users, and we'll do the same for post controller posts. And we might have to actually change these files, so let's make this smaller, and we'll open up our controllers, and let's see, we might have to edit these. Let me close these first, the model files. We'll open up the controller, and yeah, we're gonna have to edit these. So class post controller inherits from JSON API resource, and I can't spell, controller. Okay, cool. And same for the users controller, JSON API resource controller. Save that. Now these are empty controllers, but hopefully, well, I'm pretty sure that they will already know how to respond to basic REST actions. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to close these out, and since we're not using the JR generator, we got to create a resources folder inside of app. So app/resources. Cool. And we're going to create our resources files. So the next thing we'll do is create a new user resource.rb. Let's open that up. Before we do that, let's also create our post resource.rb. And let's edit the user resource first, why don't we? So we'll say class user resource. Apparently both of these files are the same. User resource inherits from JSON API resource. Resource, and that, and then we'll just say which attributes we want to expose, and we only have name in this case, and users have many posts, right? So it has many posts, and save that. Let's open up our post resource, and we'll do class post resource from JSON API resource, and this, which attributes does the post have? I forget. Attributes, it's got title and content, and it has one user, and we'll also add a filter in which we'll say filter user. Cool. So what do we do now? Before we start up our server and test this out, we do have to add our routes, but it's a little different than you would normally do it. Instead of doing something like, let me open up the routes folder. Instead of doing something like resources, users, and resources posts, we got to add JSON API in front of that. So we'll do that here. That's a really cool little Vim command, by the way. If you press period, in Vim it repeats your latest action. So say for example I had JSON API here, I'll add JSON API resources, and this works regardless of what you're doing. I can do period here, and it'll just create the last action in a new place. So alright, I got off topic there, but Vim is pretty cool. Check it out. So now what we can do is start up our server. So let's save this and go down to our console, and we'll start up the server and make sure we don't have any errors. So let's make this a little bigger. Rails S. Okay, we do have an error. Let's check it out, see what it is. So it says uninitialized constant JSON API. Alright, I'm going to pause this and figure out what's going on for a sec. Okay, so we're back. So for whatever reason, I don't know, I don't think my JSON API resources gem installed correctly, so I just ran bundle again, and I think it should work now. So let's go ahead and try it. So we'll just start our server. And awesome, the server's up and running. So basically what we're going to do now is use curl to create records. So I'm going to first create a user, and then I'll add a post to that user, and we can even check it out in Postman, but let's just use curl in the console now and test it out, and then we'll see how it looks in JSON too. So we'll see how it looks in JSON in a nice format when we check it out in Postman. So let's just go ahead and open a new tab here, and I'm going to just copy paste a curl command. I'll put it in the description so you don't have to type this out. So here it is. Let's paste that. Basically it just says curl, and then remember that JSON API has specific headers, HTTP headers, that you got to give it as far as the accept and content type attributes go. So make sure you set those. This one especially, content type. Actually, they're both the same. So you'll notice this is in a particularly spec compliant JSON format, and it's got this data key here, and it can either be an object or have an array. But anyway, we'll see how it looks when we make it a little prettier. So let's run this, and hopefully we get a 201 created. Awesome. So our first user here, Consuela, beautiful name, Consuela, was created. Here we get a 201 back, which is very cool. So let's go ahead and add a post to Consuela. Okay, I'm back. I just paused it while I wrote that curl command. So we're going to do the same thing essentially. It's not exactly the same, but we are going to use curl and make a post request. So let's just first go ahead and see if this works before I go over it. So hopefully we get a 201 again. Awesome, we get a 201 back. So now Consuela has now created, or now she has one post called the laughter post, as you'll see right here, with content ha ha ha, and it is related to the first user, which we know is Consuela because she's our only user, therefore her ID is 1. So let's go ahead and see how, or let's make a query in Postman and go ahead and see how this looks when it's a little nicer or a little better formatted. So we'll open up Postman right here. I have it on my nav bar, and we'll just say let's make a get request to the users, and we'll see, do we need, I don't think we're going to need the .json because we've got our headers in there already, so we'll just say send, and there we go, we've got our Consuela resource returned to us. So as you can see, data is the resource object being created. Then we've got our relationships, which is a hash of resource names and resource objects for related records. And we're going to go ahead and click on it. And let's run that. Let's make that request. And we can see that that there's keys like type and attributes. The type being the name of the resource and an ID. And they've also got the attributes that we defined. So pretty awesome. We've got a pretty awesome API built in a cool protocol in JSON API with the JSON API resources, and it's also pretty straightforward, and it's also pretty easy to consume the stuff that it generates. So go ahead and try it out and make something a little more complex. I hope this helped out, and good luck.